The galaxy was old, older than most species could truly understand. For 12,000 years, the galactic Concord had stood as a union of 17 different alien races. They traded with each other. They protected each other. They shared knowledge and technology across countless star systems. Peace was not perfect, but it was real. The Concord had survived wars, plagues, and disasters. Its members believed they knew everything worth knowing about the universe. But in the deepest parts of their archives, buried under centuries of forgotten data, there were files that spoke of something strange. These files talked about a species called humans. They came from a small blue planet on the far edge of the galaxy. The records said humans were weak. Their bodies had no natural weapons, no claws, no armored skin, no poison. They lived short lives compared to most conquered species. By all logic, they should have been prey, not predators. Yet the old files told a different story. They spoke of creatures who refused to die, beings who would fight against impossible odds and somehow win. The records described a race that formed bonds with anything, even dangerous animals that should have eaten them. They spoke of humans hunting larger creatures not through strength, but through patience. They would chase their prey for days without rest until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. Most members of the Concord thought these stories were myths. After all, the humans had vanished 400 years ago. A great silence had fallen over their region of space. Ships that went to investigate never returned. Eventually, the Concord stopped trying. The human was marked as a dead zone on every star map. Children grew up hearing about humans the way they heard about monsters in bedtime stories. Scary, exciting, but not real. Commander Al did not believe in humans. He was an species with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in nearly every direction at once. He had served in the Conquered Fleet for 60 years. He had fought pirates and rebels and criminals of every species. He considered himself a practical officer who dealt in facts, not legends. On this particular day, Al stood on the bridge of his warship, the voice of reason, staring at a tactical display that showed him facts he did not want to accept. The colony world of Aurum 4 was dying. 3 million civilians lived on that planet. Farmers, merchants, families, children. And descending upon them was a nightmare that the Conquered had hoped to avoid for another century. The Wraith Collective had arrived. The Wraith were machines, not the helpful kind that served organic life, but something far worse. They were a consciousness that existed across millions of mechanical bodies. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They consumed. Every organic world they touched was stripped of life. The bodies of the dead were processed into fuel for more machines. The Wraith had been slowly expanding from the galaxy's eastern edge for thousands of years. The Conquered had built defenses. They had prepared strategies. None of it was working. Al watched the display as Wraith harvester ships entered orbit around Aurum 4. His own fleet was too small. Reinforcements were too far away. The High Council had already sent him a message. It was coded in diplomatic language, but the meaning was clear. Aurum 4 was a strategic loss. He was to observe, document, and withdraw. 3 million lives were not worth risking the ships needed to defend more important worlds. His mandibles clicked in frustration. He hated this decision, but he was a soldier. He followed orders. Then something impossible happened. A ship appeared out of hyperspace. It was not a Conquered design. Al had memorized every ship configuration used by the 17-member species. This vessel matched nothing in his memory. It was sleek and aggressive, built like a predator. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, with running lights that glowed a soft blue. His tactical officer made a sound of pure shock. The young's wings trembled as he stared at his console. "Commander," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "From that ship, they are. The computer says they are human." Al felt something cold move through his body. Fear, confusion, disbelief. He had spent his whole life treating humans as fairy tales. "That is not possible," he said. "Run the scan again." Before his officer could respond, more ships appeared. 3, then 12, then 50. They kept coming, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Each one was different in size and shape, but they all shared the same predatory design, the same dark hulls, the same blue lights. A communication channel opened. A voice spoke in perfect Concord standard, the common language used by all member species. Concord vessel, this is Captain Cole of the Earth Unified Navy. We have been monitoring your communications. We know about the Wraith attack on Orem 4. We are here to provide assistance. Al found that he could not speak. His mind was still trying to process what was happening. Humans were real. They had returned, and they had brought a fleet. On the bridge of the starship Endurance, Cole stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was 47 years old. His dark hair was cut short in military style. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. Beside him stood Lieutenant Dawson, a younger officer with red hair pulled back in a tight braid. She was watching the sensor data with barely contained excitement. "They are not responding, sir," she said. "I think we broke them." Allowed himself a small smile. "Give them a moment. Finding out your legends are real takes some adjustment." The truth was that humanity had not vanished 400 years ago. They had retreated. A terrible plague had swept through the Sol system, killing billions. The survivors had sealed themselves away from the galaxy, rebuilding in secret. They had watched the conquered from the shadows. They had seen the Wraith coming long before the other species understood the threat. Now the waiting was over. "Lieutenant," said, "open a channel to all human ships." Nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice carried to every vessel in the formation. "All ships, this is the captain. We have spent 400 years preparing for this moment. The people on that planet are not our species. They are not our allies. Most of them have never even heard of Earth. But they are people, innocent people, and they are about to be slaughtered by machines that see them as nothing but fuel." He paused, looking out at the planet below. Already, he could see fires burning on the surface. The Wraith had begun their harvest. Today, the galaxy remembers what humans are. All ships engage at will. The fleet moved forward as one. Behind them, Commander Al finally found his voice. "By the ancient stars," he whispered, "the legends are true." Wraith harvesters descended through the atmosphere of Orem 4 like a swarm of metal locusts. Each harvester was the size of a small building. Their hulls were covered in spinning blades and collection tubes designed to gather organic matter with terrible efficiency. In the cities below, millions of civilians ran through the streets in panic. They had heard stories about the Wraith. Everyone in the galaxy had. But stories could not prepare anyone for the reality of seeing those machines blocking out the sky. In the capital city of, a young mother named held her two children close as they hid inside a collapsed temple. The building had been hit by debris from an exploding ship. Dust filled the air. Through the broken walls, she could see harvesters landing in the main square. Mechanical legs extended from their bodies. Collection drones poured out of their sides like insects from a nest. A closed her eyes and prepared to die. Then she heard a sound that did not make sense. It was a roar, not the grinding noise of Wraith machinery, but something organic, something alive. She opened her eyes and looked up. Ships were falling from the sky, not falling in the way of crashing vessels, but falling with purpose. They were drop ships, angular and heavily armored, painted in dark colors with strange symbols on their sides. They hit the ground hard enough to crack the stone streets. Their doors opened before they had even stopped moving. And out of those doors came creatures from legend. They were bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, soft skin in various shades of brown and pink. They wore black armor that covered their bodies and carried weapons that glowed with blue energy. They moved fast, faster than their small bodies should have allowed. And they were loud. They shouted to each other in a language it did not understand. But there was no fear in their voices, only determination. Sergeant Wright was the first human to set foot on Orem 4 soil. He was 32 years old, with brown skin and close-cropped black hair. A scar ran across his left cheek from a training accident years ago. He had been a soldier since he was 18. His entire adult life had been spent preparing for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Now the war was here and was ready. "Spread out," he shouted to his squad. "Defensive positions around those civilians. Nothing gets through. Nothing." His team moved without hesitation. Corporal Blake took position behind a fallen pillar, her rifle already aimed at the approaching drones. She was 28, with pale skin and short hair that stuck out from under her helmet. She had grown up in the underground cities of Mars, never seeing real sunlight until she was 12. The dark streets of an alien world did not frighten her. Private Vega set up a heavy weapon near the temple entrance. Private Maria Santos covered the east flank. Specialist activated his scanner and began marking enemy positions for the fleet above. The Wraith drones detected the human presence and changed direction. Hundreds of small machines, each one bristling with cutting tools and collection appendages, turned toward the squad. Their optical sensors glowed red in the dusty air. Smiled grimly, "Here they come." The first wave of drones reached them 30 seconds later. What followed was chaos. Human weapons tore through the machines with brutal efficiency. Energy bolts burned through metal bodies. Explosive rounds shattered drones into pieces, but there were so many of them. For every machine that fell, 3 more took its place. The drones did not feel fear. They did not retreat. They simply kept coming. Took a hit to her shoulder. A drone's cutting blade sliced through her armor and into the flesh beneath. She screamed in pain but did not stop firing. Blood ran down her arm as she switched her rifle to her other hand and kept shooting. "Corporal is hit," shouted. Moved to her position, firing as he ran. He reached and pulled her behind cover. The wound was bad, deep enough to see bone. Any other species would have collapsed from shock. Looked at him with fierce eyes. "I can still fight." Did not argue. He had seen humans fight with worse injuries. It was not bravery in the way other species understood it. It was something deeper, something built into their DNA from millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Above them, the human fleet engaged the Wraith mother ships in orbit. Captain Cole watched the battle from the bridge of the Endurance, his face calm despite the destruction around him. Wraith attack craft swarmed his vessels like angry insects. Shields flickered under constant bombardment. Warning lights flashed across every console. But the human ships did not break. The Endurance turned hard to port, presenting its broadside to a Wraith cruiser. Every weapon on that side of the ship fired at once. The cruiser's hull cracked open like an egg. Secondary explosions tore through its interior. Within seconds, it was nothing but drifting debris. "Target destroyed," reported from her station. 2 more cruisers approaching from bearing 270. "Bring us around," ordered. "Signal the Defiant and the Valor to flank. We will hit them from 3 sides." Commander Al watched from the bridge of the Voice of Reason. He had never seen anything like this. The humans fought as if they were born for war. Their ships moved in perfect coordination. Their weapons were devastatingly effective, but more than that, they fought with a kind of joy, not cruelty, not bloodlust, something else. They were protecting those people on the planet below, and they were glad to do it. On the surface, the battle continued for hours, and his squad held their position around the temple. They ran low on ammunition. They took more injuries. Private Santos broke her arm when a drone knocked her into a wall. Specialist was knocked unconscious by falling debris, but they did not stop fighting. More dropships arrived. More human soldiers joined the battle. Slowly, block by block, they pushed the Wraith back. A stayed hidden with her children throughout the fighting. She watched these strange creatures risk their lives for people they had never met. One of them, a young female soldier with blood running down her face, stopped near the temple entrance. She looked at Anne and her children. Then she smiled. It was a tired, painful smile, but it was real. "You are safe now," the soldier said in broken conquered standard. "We will protect you." I did not know what to say. In the stories her grandmother had told her, humans were monsters, terrible beasts who conquered everything they touched. But these creatures, these tired and bleeding warriors, had just saved her family. The battle for Orem 4 lasted 19 hours. When it finally ended, not a single human ship had been lost. On the ground, human casualties were minimal compared to the thousands of drones they had destroyed. The Wraith Harvester fleet retreated into deep space, leaving the colony intact. 3 million lives had been saved. And the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. 3 days after the Battle of Orem 4, a new ship arrived in conquered space. It was different from the warships that had fought against the Wraith. This vessel was sleek and elegant, designed for diplomacy rather than combat. Its name was painted on the hull in both human script and conquered standard. New Horizon, a symbol of what humanity hoped to achieve. Ambassador Diana Fletcher stood at the observation window as the ship approached the conquered capital station. She was 61 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a simple style. Her face showed the marks of a hard life, wrinkles around her eyes, a small scar on her chin from an accident in her youth. She had spent 30 years in the diplomatic corps, representing humanity in negotiations that no one outside Earth ever knew about. Now she would represent her species to an entire galaxy. The capital station was enormous. It hung in orbit around the Concord like an artificial moon. 17 different architectural styles blended together in its design. Each section had been built by a different member species over thousands of years. Lights flickered across its surface in patterns that seemed almost alive. Behind Diana, Lieutenant Commander Torres checked his uniform for the 100th time. He was her military, assigned to protect her and advise her on security matters. He was 35 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes that rarely smiled. Had grown up during the plague years. He remembered hiding in underground shelters as a child while millions died above. He remembered the fear, the hunger, the uncertainty. "Are you ready?" Diana asked without turning around. Straightened his shoulders. "I have been ready my entire life." The meeting took place in the Grand Council Chamber, a circular room large enough to hold representatives from all 17 conquered species. Diana walked into that room alone, and her other staff waited outside. This was her moment, her responsibility. 17 alien faces watched her enter. Some were curious, others were afraid. A few seemed almost hostile. Diana met each pair of eyes in turn. She did not look away. She did not show weakness. High Counselor of the Eye spoke first. He was ancient even by his species' long standards. His scales had faded to a dull gray and his movements were slow, but his eyes were sharp. He had led the conquered for 200 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. "Ambassador Fletcher," he said in his deep, rumbling voice, "the Galactic Conquered welcomes you. We have many questions." Diana nodded. "I expected nothing less. 400 years ago, your species vanished. We sent ships to investigate. They never returned. We assumed you were dead. Now you appear from nowhere with a fleet powerful enough to defeat the Wraith. Explain." Diana took a slow breath. This was the story she had been preparing to tell for decades. "We did not vanish by choice," she began. "A plague struck it was not natural. Someone engineered it. We never discovered who. The disease killed 90% of our population within 5 years. Billions of people died. Our civilization nearly collapsed." The chamber was silent. Even the hostile faces showed signs of shock. "The survivors made a decision," Diana continued. "We would seal ourselves away from the galaxy. We would rebuild in secret, and we would prepare for the day when we could return. That day has come." A counselor leaned forward. Her wings twitched with nervous energy. "You could have asked for help. The Conquered has resources, medical technology. We could have assisted you." Diana smiled sadly. We did not know who had attacked us. For all we knew, it could have been a conquered member. We could not risk exposing ourselves to another attack, so we hid, we rebuilt, and we watched. Watched asked, "What do you mean?" "We have been monitoring conquered communications for 300 years. We know about your politics, your wars, your fears. We know about the Wraith. We saw them coming long before your analysts predicted their advance. We have been preparing to fight them for generations." Another counselor spoke up. This one was a massive being covered in thick fur. His species, they were known for their strength and their short tempers. "If you knew about the Wraith, why did you wait so long to help? Millions have already died to those machines." Diana's expression did not change. "Because we were not ready. We are a small species, counselor. Our population has only recently recovered to pre-plague levels. If we had revealed ourselves too soon, we would have been destroyed. We needed time to build our fleet, to train our soldiers, to develop weapons that could match the Wraith." "And now you are ready?" asked. "Now we are ready." The council members exchanged looks. Some seemed relieved, others remained suspicious. The counselor crossed his massive arms. "How do we know you will not turn on us once the Wraith are defeated? Your species has a reputation for violence. The old records speak of wars fought among yourselves, terrible weapons that could destroy entire cities. Why should we trust you?" Diana had expected this question. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small object. It was a photograph printed on real paper, old technology, sentimental. She held it up for the council to see. "This is my family," she said. "My parents, my brothers, my grandparents, they all died in the plague. I was 7 years old when I watched my mother take her last breath. I grew up in shelters, eating recycled food and drinking recycled water. I spent my childhood surrounded by death." She lowered the photograph. "Every human alive today has a story like mine. We did not survive because we are violent. We survived because we refused to give up, because we held on to each other when everything else was falling apart, because we believed that someday things would get better." She looked directly at the counselor. "We are not your enemies. We never were. We came back because we heard people suffering, because we saw the Wraith destroying innocent lives, because we could not stand by and do nothing. That is not violence. That is compassion." The chamber fell silent again. Diana waited. She had said everything she could say. Now the decision was in their hands. Finally spoke. "The conquered will need time to discuss this matter, but I believe I speak for many when I say this. Whatever happens next, we are grateful. You saved millions of lives on Aurum 4. That is not something we will forget." Diana bowed her head slightly. "We do not ask for gratitude. We only ask for the chance to help. The Wraith are coming for all of us. Together we can stop them. Divided we will fall. The choice is yours." She turned and walked out of the chamber, was waiting outside. He could see the exhaustion on her face, the weight of 400 years of waiting. "How did it go?" he asked. Diana smiled faintly. "We planted the seed. Now we wait to see if it grows." Wraith did not wait for the conquered to make its decision. Within 2 weeks of the Battle of Aurum 4, they launched their largest offensive in recorded history. 3 colony worlds fell in rapid succession. I-7, a major industrial center, was overrun. Prime lost its outer moon. Billions of refugees fled toward the core systems, overwhelming every resource the conquered had. Panic spread through the Alliance. Several species began preparing evacuation ships for the galaxy's far edges. Politicians gave speeches about sacrifice and difficult choices. Behind closed doors, they argued about which worlds to abandon and which to save. The conquered was falling apart. Admiral Laura watched the strategic display aboard her flagship, the Constellation. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had joined the Earth Unified Navy at 18. She had risen through the ranks through hard work and harder choices. Now she commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled. The display showed the current state of the war. Red markers indicated Wraith forces. Blue markers showed conquered positions. Green markers represented human ships. The red was spreading like a disease across the star map. The blue was shrinking, but the green was holding steady. Captain Daniel Price entered the command center. He was the captain of the destroyer Resolute, one of Laura's most trusted officers. "The Council has agreed to joint operations," he reported. "We have full authorization to coordinate with conquered forces." Laura nodded. "Good, gather the captains. It is time to show them what we have been saving." The briefing took place an hour later. 50 human captains filled the tactical room, their faces projected on screens from across the fleet. Laura stood at the center, the strategic display glowing behind her. "The Wraith think they understand us," she began. "They analyzed our tactics at Orem 4. They believe they have adapted their strategies to counter our weapons and formations." She pressed a button. The display changed, showing a detailed map of Wraith positions across 18 star systems. "They are wrong. At Orem 4, we showed them 3% of our capabilities, just enough to win the battle, just enough to make them overconfident. Now we show them the rest." The counteroffensive began at midnight, Concord Standard Time. 18 human strike groups hit 18 targets simultaneously. The coordination was perfect. Not a single ship was out of position. Not a single weapon fired too early or too late. On I-7, Sergeant Wright led his team through the ruins of a processing facility. The Wraith had converted the industrial complex into a harvesting center. Organic matter went in. Machine components came out. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. Corporal Blake moved beside him, her shoulder still bandaged from her wound at Orem 4. The doctors had told her to rest for another week. She had refused. When had ordered her to stay behind, she had looked at him with those fierce eyes and said 3 words. "Try stopping me." He had not tried. The facility's core was located deep underground. That was their target. A massive data storage unit that contained strategic information about Wraith movements across the sector. Destroying it would blind the machines for weeks, long enough for conquered forces to evacuate the remaining civilians. They fought through 3 levels of defenders, machine soldiers that stood 7 feet tall and carried weapons that could cut through armor like paper. Lost 2 soldiers in the first engagement. Private took a direct hit to the chest. Specialist was overwhelmed by drones. Their deaths burned in his heart, but he could not stop. He could not mourn, not yet. The core chamber was the size of a stadium. Massive servers lined the walls, humming with data. At the center stood a Wraith commander unit, a machine intelligence far more advanced than the drones they had faced outside. It turned to face them as they entered. Its optical sensors glowed bright red. "Humans," it said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "You are an anomaly. Our records indicated your extinction. This has been corrected." Raised his weapon. "Your records are about to need another update." The fight was brutal. The commander unit was faster and stronger than anything they had faced before. It moved through the chamber like a shadow, striking from unexpected angles. Private Santos went down with a crushed leg. Specialist was thrown against a wall hard enough to crack his helmet. But humans did not give up. They never had. Circled behind the machine while kept its attention, she was bleeding again. Her shoulder wound had reopened from the strain. Pain clouded her vision, but she kept moving. She found the weak point, a joint in the machine's back where its armor was thinner. She emptied her entire magazine into that spot. The commander unit stumbled. Its movements became erratic, seized the moment. He charged forward, pulling a plasma grenade from his belt. He shoved the grenade into the hole had created and threw himself backward. The explosion filled the chamber with light. When the smoke cleared, the commander unit was nothing but scattered parts. Lay on the floor, his ears ringing, his body aching. crawled to his side. They looked at each other and laughed. It was the exhausted laughter of people who had survived the impossible. Above them, the human fleet tore through Wraith defenses with devastating efficiency. Ships that the machines had never seen before emerged from hiding. Weapons that had been kept secret for centuries were finally unleashed. The Wraith, so confident in their superiority, found themselves outmatched at every turn. Admiral watched the battle reports come in. Victory after victory, system after system. The red markers on her display were shrinking. The green markers were spreading. "Status report," she ordered. Captain Price checked his console. All primary objectives achieved. 16 Wraith command ships destroyed. 3 manufacturing stations neutralized. Estimated enemy losses are in the millions. Laura allowed herself a small smile. "And our losses?" 27 ships damaged, 4 destroyed. Crew casualties are still being tallied, but initial reports suggest under 200 dead. 200. Each one of those deaths hurt. Each one was a person with a name, a family, a future that would never happen. Laura would mourn them later. She would read their files and remember their faces. But right now, she had a war to win. "Signal all ships," she said. "Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2. Across the galaxy, human forces pushed forward. They did not stop for rest. They did not pause to celebrate their victories. There would be time for that later. Right now, innocent people were still dying. Wraith machines were still consuming organic life. The fight was not over. It was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Orem 4. The war against the Wraith was not over. An enemy so vast could not be destroyed in a single campaign. But their advance had been broken. Their fleets had been scattered across 100 systems. Their threat had been reduced from extinction to something that could be managed. The galaxy had time to breathe, time to rebuild, time to hope. The ceremony took place on Prime, the ancient of the species. It was here, 12,000 years ago, that the Galactic Concord had been founded. It was here that the first treaties had been signed. And it was here that humanity would take its place among the stars. The Great Archive stood at the center of the capital city. Its walls were made of a strange crystal that glowed with soft inner light. Inside those walls were records of every species that had ever joined the Concord, every treaty, every war, every triumph and tragedy. Somewhere in those archives were the ancient files that spoke of humans as legends. Soon, those files would need to be updated. Ambassador Diana Fletcher walked up the steps of the archive with careful dignity. Her dress uniform was immaculate. Her medals caught the light of the alien sun. Behind her walked the heroes of the war. Captain Cole, who had led the first human fleet into battle. Admiral Laura, who had commanded the counteroffensive. Sergeant Wright and Corporal Blake, who had become symbols of human courage on the ground. Millions of aliens lined the streets. They had come from every corner of the galaxy to witness this moment. Some cheered, others simply stared in wonder. A few wept. The legends had become real. The monsters of bedtime stories had turned out to be saviors. High Counselor waited at the top of the steps. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. The stress of the war had taken its toll, but his eyes were bright with something that looked almost like joy. "Ambassador Fletcher," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd through amplification technology. "Representatives of Earth, you have come far, you have suffered much, and you have given more than any of us had the right to ask." He paused, looking out at the crowd. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Concord has stood as a union of species. We have weathered storms that threatened to tear us apart. We have faced enemies that seemed impossible to defeat, but we have always survived because we stood together. He turned back to Diana. "Today, we add a new member to our union, a species that we thought lost, a people that we remembered only as legends. They have proven themselves not through words but through actions. They came to us not as conquerors but as protectors. They asked for nothing but the chance to help." reached into his robes and pulled out a small crystal disc. It was the ceremonial seal of membership. Every species that joined the conquered received one. It was a symbol of unity, of belonging. On behalf of the Galactic Conquered, said, I welcome humanity to our family. He held out the seal. Diana stepped forward and took it. The crystal was warm in her hands. It pulsed with soft light, recognizing her touch. For a moment she could not speak. This was the moment her people had been waiting for. 400 years of hiding, 400 years of preparation, 400 years of hoping that someday things would be different. She looked at the seal, then she looked out at the crowd, at the millions of alien faces watching her. We do not know why we survived, she said. Her voice was steady, strong. We do not know why a plague that should have destroyed us only made us stronger. We do not know what ancient forces shaped our evolution, turning us into creatures that refuse to give up no matter what the odds. She held up the seal. But we know this. We are not legends. We are not myths. We are people. We have families and friends and dreams. We laugh and cry and love and grieve. We are small and fragile, and we live such short lives compared to many of you. She lowered the seal. And yet we ran toward the fire. We heard people screaming in the darkness, and we could not ignore them. We saw innocent lives being destroyed, and we could not stand by. Not because we are special, not because we are chosen, but because that is simply who we are. The crowd was silent. Every eye was fixed on her. The galaxy is not ours to rule, Diana continued. It is not ours to abandon. It is our home, and we protect what is ours. We always have. We always will. She paused. That is not legend. That is just who we are. The silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then the cheering began. It rolled across the crowd like thunder. Aliens of every species raised their voices together. The sound echoed off the crystal walls of the archive and rose toward the sky. Behind Diana, Wright stood at attention. Beside him, Blake wiped tears from her eyes. She had told herself she would not cry. She had lied. Cole watched the celebration with quiet satisfaction. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Now it was here, and it was more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Later that evening, when the formal ceremonies were over and the dignitaries had retired to their quarters, found himself walking through the streets of the capital. The celebrations continued around him. Aliens danced and sang. Humans mingled with species they had only read about in old files. Laughter filled the air. A small child approached him. She was young, perhaps 5 or 6 years old by human standards. Her compound eyes looked up at him with curiosity. "Are you really human?" she asked. Knelt down so that he was at her level. His face softened into a gentle smile. "Yeah," he said, "I really am. My grandmother says your kind fought monsters in the old times. She says you never stopped fighting, even when you were alone." Thought about the friends he had lost, about and in all the others who had given their lives so that strangers could live, about recovering from wounds that would have killed most species, about 400 years of darkness and the small flame of hope that had kept humanity alive. "We never fight alone," he said softly, "not anymore." The child smiled and ran back to her family, stood and watched her go. Around him, the celebration continued. Human voices mixed with alien songs, the sound of a galaxy beginning to heal. Somewhere above, the stars shone bright. They had watched humanity rise and fall and rise again. They would watch for millions of years more. The legends had walked into the fray, and they had reminded the universe why they had become legends in the first place. Not through conquest, not through violence, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to let others suffer alone. That was humanity. That was who they had always been. And now the galaxy would never forget.